All it takes is a quick look at today's headlines to see what happens when critical infrastructure is neglected. When bridges fall down, people notice. But it's important to understand that beneath our roads and buildings lays another type of infrastructure that is falling apart and collapsing as well. We all know that without water, life is unsustainable. But the average person really doesn't give much thought to our water and sewer infrastructure, except when it fails.
Even though drinking water is probably our most important natural resource in the world, it's one that people largely don't think about. In Minnesota, we're fortunate in most parts of the state to have a lot of water, not just in our lakes, but in underground supplies too. We have a lot of groundwater, and it's good water.
There are some 2 million miles of piping beneath our nation's streets, most of it paid for by earlier generations, and a lot of it has seldom or never been touched. It's old, wearing out, and urgently needs attention.
Liquid Assets Minnesota is a co-production of Central States Water Environment Association Minnesota Section and TPT's Minnesota Channel.
We have 2 wells in the city. One is approximately 60 years old. One is getting closer to 70 years old. It's time to do a change.
Our old water treatment plant was built in the mid-50s. It was all steel, a lot of corrosion, a lot of rust.
We got 1.5 inches of rain in the spring, and I had to do an emergency bypass.
If you have 1 gallon of sewage and you add 7 gallons of rainwater, you suddenly have 8 gallons of sewage.
These communities are really kind of behind the 8 ball when it comes to matching up their needs with the available resources.
They're really living on borrowed time because there is going to be a failure. It's not if, it's when. The total need within the next 20 years, $6.9 billion.
If these residents were asked to bear these needs on their own, and if you make the assumption that this is going to be paid for out of user rate funds without grant money, you're talking at $70, $80 a month per utility. And so it really starts pushing the communities and their residents from an affordability standpoint, and in some cases, the actual viability of the community themselves.
So from a political standpoint, every politician wants to keep rates low, and they want to tell their constituents that they can have quality services at the lowest possible cost. Unfortunately, what that has led to is political decision-making that has underinvested in the capital of our water and sewer systems. And so for decades and decades, politicians have gotten away with lower rates, which is popular with the voters, but the integrity of the system has declined to the point that we're now seeing tremendous increase in costs to fix a broken system.
This is a feeder main coming from our plant that brings the water in from Lakewood Treatment Plant. It's a 42-inch pipe. You can see there's a hole in the top of it. It's probably over 100 years old.
You can see very clearly the result of this neglect. Back in the early 90s, we were averaging about 50 water main breaks a year. Today, we're averaging 140 water main breaks a year. And our engineers estimate that if we don't change our focus and invest more proactively in our water system, that number will double to 300 a year by the end of this decade.
We keep putting what I call Band-Aids on. In this case, because of the steel pipe, we can weld a cap on it.
We often talk about utility problems in terms of what is the end result or how much will the customer have to pay. And that's the only discussion that happens. Instead, we can say we know that water main breaks are disruptive to our community. They're disruptive to homeowners, they're disruptive to business owners, and they're very expensive to fix.
The unfortunate thing here is, you know, with the old aging infrastructure, this was just repaired less than 2 years ago, and now we're back here again. So now we cross our fingers that we don't have to go back in there in the next couple months.
American Water Works Standards says you should have less than 10% of your water unaccounted for. 17% of our water is lost, what we call unaccounted for water. In other words, it doesn't go through a meter. We have pipes that are over 100 years old in the ground right now on that, and we're looking to try and replace all that infrastructure as best we can, but we also have pump stations that are 60, 70 years old as well too, so we need to replace that infrastructure as well too.
It's the role of city government to build a solid infrastructural foundation with which businesses can thrive, an economy can grow on. Elected officials get really caught up in the idea of the discussion of reasonable rates, and they forget about the fact that we first need to talk about reliable rates and making the system reliable. Businesses want predictable rates, and citizens want stability, and we all need stability. So the goal is proactive long-term planning and engaging the public in an educational process. For decades, it's been cheaper for us to patch the system than to reinvest in it. And politicians are so often rewarded for short-term thinking. This requires long-term thinking.
You have this activity you do every day. It's called flush your toilet. And when you flush that toilet, do you ever think about where it goes? Well, the first thing happens that when it leaves your property, it has to travel from your property to a sewer that carries it away, that joins with other properties.
MCS is the government agency that's responsible for the collection and treatment of sewage in the 7-county Twin Cities area. Total, that's about 5,000 miles of sewage pipe that those cities own and operate. We're responsible for the operation and maintenance of about 600 miles of what we call interceptor sewer, or large pipes that are bringing the flow from each of those cities to one of the treatment plants.
One of our biggest concerns as a result of the study that we did is that we really found our smallest communities are the most vulnerable.
Our wastewater technician has been very active working with the city of Argyle. A small community up in northwest Minnesota that was looking at a tremendous amount of money in order to fix their water and wastewater systems. But without water and wastewater in a community, you don't have anything.
If the city of Argyle did not go through with this project, we would not be able to add on to services.
Overall, the whole structure of our system was in very, very bad shape. They were eventually going to shut us down.
The problem we have is when we get excessive inflow and infiltration. We exceed the capacity of the pipe. Once we do that, the water has to get out somewhere. So it'll come out manholes, it'll come out come into basements and backups. The water has to move, and once it moves, it doesn't get treated if it bypasses before it reaches the treatment rooms. It's just like pouring 20 ounces of juice into a 16-ounce glass. It's going to come out.
It's not a choice anymore. It's something that we have to do.
When we talk about I&I, generally 60 to 75% of I&I comes from private property.
I mean, your sewer system is equivalent to your roof, your driveway, windows. You've lived in your home for 30, 40 years. You're going to have to replace all those things, and your sewer system falls in that category also.
Across the system, there's about 250 million gallons a day that are treated. To put some perspective on the amount of flow of 250 million gallons is in a day, it could fill up the Metrodome in about 2 days. I'm told it could fill up the Empire State Building in about 1 day. We're protecting the public health and the environment ultimately. We're putting out clean water into the river, which provides a better environment for all.
Every day, we benefit from the environmental, public health, social, and economic benefits that clean and safe water provide. The challenge facing Minnesota is how to invest in and sustain our drinking water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater infrastructure to ensure that the public can continue to enjoy these benefits long into the future.
We all play a role in protecting drinking water. Source water protection is a huge part of that. It's a lot easier to keep things out of water supplies than it is to get them out of the water once they're in there.
You need to know what status your infrastructure is in. And the fact that people don't necessarily always want to have that conversation or make that investment doesn't fix your infrastructure.
If you don't have those water and wastewater systems, you have no economic development. You can't go anywhere.
The worst case scenario in my mind is that we have a community of 150 people, and we have a lot of those in Minnesota, that suddenly has a massive failure of their drinking water system or their wastewater system. Residents in that community cannot afford $200 a month or more for water. Obviously, people are going to have to just walk away from those houses.
It may sound a little doom and gloom, But if the trend continues in this manner, I don't know how you can draw a different conclusion that it's going to have some dire consequences.
I think we've become so distracted with the luxuries of life that we've forgotten about the necessities, and drinking water is important, and so is the reinvestment in it.
It's just like the whole issue about litter. We want to pick it up. We don't want people to leave things in the ditch. If we don't take care of our infrastructure, we're going to leave all that in the ditch for our kids and our grandkids. And that doesn't say much about us.
Liquid Assets Minnesota is a co-production of Central States Water Environment Association Minnesota Section and TPT's Minnesota Channel, produced in collaboration with multiple Minnesota-based organizations, on the web at blueprintmn.com. Major funding has been provided by the City of Duluth, West Central Initiative, an American Planning Association Minnesota chapter, and President's Council. Additional funding has also been provided by AE2S, Bolton & Menk Incorporated, Dakota Supply Group, HR Green, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, Minnesota Rural Water Association, Minnesota section of the American Water Works Association, and TKDA. Funding has also been provided by the following: